In this video we'll be rebuilding the Saab 9.5 and Saab 9.3 alarm siren. So if your car alarm goes off randomly, or if you get the service theft alarm message in the SID, this is what you need to do to fix it. So what happens over time is that the electronics in this alarm siren goes bad. And the siren will start to think that the car is being stolen and gives off random alarms. And annoyingly, even if you go to the car, you unlock it, you even start the car and drive away, the alarm siren might still be blaring on its own. But we'll fix all that today in this second part of the Trionic 7 alarm series. In part 1 I mentioned some workarounds for dealing with a failing alarm siren without having to rebuild it. I'll show you the required parts in just a minute, but first we have to take the siren out of the car. And as I said in part 1, you lift the car up and you take the front left wheel off, and that's true for both the left-hand drive and right-hand drive cars. Then you open up the fender liner just a little bit. That's the black plastic inside the wheel arch. And for the Saab 9.5 you open up the front part, and for the Saab 9.3 you open up just behind the wheel. You don't have to take the entire fender liner off. And then you reach inside and you grab the connector, you pull the red tab up while pulling out the connector, and then there's two bolts of 10mm size. There's the top one and the lower one. And then you can take the siren into your electronics lab, like this one. The next step is to take the siren apart, but that's potentially the most difficult step for you. This alarm siren I've purchased used from a Saab 9.5 model year 1999. And back then the siren was simply held together by 6 Phillips head screws. And when you take the screws out you can pry the siren apart. But soon after, Saab decided this was actually too easy to open up, so they glued the siren together instead. And now you can't take the siren apart with the screws, but you actually have to cut it open with a Dremel or a saw of some kind. And that's actually quite annoying. And that's why I bought an older siren from an older car, so that I easily could take it apart and rebuild it. So for me the disassembly will be very easy. I just remove 6 of these Phillips head screws and then I take the siren unit apart. And here you can see the PCB of the siren, including those infamous batteries. Next we remove these Torx head bolts, which will then loosen the PCB from the siren. Now we can pull it apart even further. And under the PCB we can see the actual horn, which makes the noise. So the main star of this video will be this PCB, and that's what we're going to focus on for the rest of this video. Now I need to tell you that this is a live circuit even though we've disconnected it from the car. These are lithium batteries, and you have to remember that they can be hazardous if you short circuit them or expose them to heat. I'm wearing glasses and I recommend that you do too. The chances of anything happening are low, but better safe than sorry. Now a very common mistake people make when rebuilding these sirens is that they only replace these batteries. Sure, they are usually empty and last about 10 years from manufacture, but it's not the whole reason for the alarm siren going off randomly. In my opinion, there are 3 more reasons that we need to take into account. The first reason is that the capacitors age as well. Here we have 1, 2, 3 electrolytic capacitors, and together with batteries these are the only components that really age in a PCB. Then you need to remember that the alarm siren is located in the wheel well. It is therefore very exposed to moisture and dirt. If you drive in a puddle, the wheel will fling water all around it. And even though it's protected by the fender liner and the siren housing, moisture can still make it inside here. And this of course also messes up the electronics. And the final reason can be found underneath. If we take a close look at these solderings, a few of these might show signs of cracking. And I suspect that because this siren was made in the late 90s, this was in the beginning of trying to make solder lead-free, and that's a very worthy cause, and I agree fully with the goals of it. But in the 90s, which was the beginning of the lead-free solder era, we didn't really know how to do this the right way. So as the PCB ages, it gets warm, it gets cold, it's put under thermal stress, some of these solder joints might crack. And these are the 4 contributing factors to why the alarm siren fails. So in this video, we'll be resoldering all these solder joints with good leaded solder. We will be replacing the batteries with new lithium batteries of the same type, and we'll also be replacing the capacitors with correct high quality components. And then when all is done, we're gonna coat the entire PCB front and back with some high quality conformal coating. This is a plastic spray that will prevent moisture from entering the components. I've purchased a set of 2 batteries from eBay, and I'll give you a link down in the description. Problem with eBay is of course that auctions come and go, so you might have to look around for it yourself. If we look on the batteries on the PCB, you'll find that one end has 2 solder points to the PCB here, and the other side has just 1 here. And it's kind of an odd size and it's hard to find the exact replacement. The battery is of type CR17335. All this will be listed down in the video description for reference. And commonly if you go and buy one of these batteries, you will only get the actual battery itself. These solder points have actually been welded to the battery itself. You see this metal part here on the side. And while in theory it's possible to purchase the battery loose and try to solder this on yourself. But again, these lithium batteries are very sensitive to heat and short circuiting, and I would strongly advise against doing this. This weld joint that comes from the factory is made with a special type of welder, and it's nothing you can do at home. And you need to make sure you get a battery of the correct type. If you go to eBay and type CR17335, you will get a lot of results with a newer battery type called CR17335 SE. In fact, eBay will think you mean the SE type and almost only show you those results. Problem is, the SE battery is completely different, and experience from other people rebuilding their sirens has shown that these batteries might work for a few weeks, but then start to fail again. So you want these orange type batteries that say CR17335 and nothing else. I've also heard from people that I trust there's another battery type called CR123A that you can use for this purpose. The good thing about that battery is that it can be bought quite easily. Varta makes those batteries as well as many other manufacturers. In contrast, the CR17335 from Sanyo is basically only available on eBay these days. So let's take a closer look at the battery I purchased. It's from eBay and it cost me around $9 and free shipping from Hong Kong. And yes, it is eBay, so even though it says Sanyo, I think this is some cheap knockoff. Manufacturing date here is September 2016. And even though both the item description and photographs on eBay promised me a 3-pronged tab, I only got this standard 2-prong. So there's 1 tab here and 1 tab here. I did complain to eBay and I got half my money back for compensation. And the reason I'm fine with this in any way is that I've checked with some people and they tell me you can actually angle the battery slightly and still get it to fit with just 1 prong. We'll see if that's true later in this video. Next we have the capacitors called C1, C2 and C4. And before you ask, yes, there are other capacitors on the PCB too, but those are a different type that don't fail with age. I've bought capacitors for real cheap. These 3 cost me in total about $2 to buy. The C1 capacitor has 10 microfarads and must withstand 16 volts. C2 has 220 microfarads and must withstand 10 volts. And C4 is the biggest one with 330 microfarads and must withstand 25 volts. The important figure here is the capacitance. If you find something with a higher voltage rating, that's fine, but it must have the exact same capacitance. So here's my C1, C2 and C4. And make sure you get good temperature ratings. All of the capacitors I made sure to have a temperature range of -40 to +105 degrees Celsius. Most capacitors you buy are from -40 to +85, but I wanted to go higher since this is located so close to the engine and does become warm. Of course, the limiting factor here is still the temperature range of the batteries, but there's no price difference really with this capacitor for the temperature range. And that's it for parts. Let's go ahead with the rebuild. I'll start by removing the batteries, and they're held in by the solder joints of course, but also by some thermal glue underneath. Now, just as I've said in previous videos, I'm not an expert solderer, so the solders aren't going to be works of art. But if you have some constructive tips, please let me know down in the comments, as always. And again, I don't really have a good close-up camera, so I'm trying to show you this as best as I can. But these are the 6 points, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, that will be desoldering. And I'll be using a soldering gun and this solder sucker to get the soldering tin off. First round done, we actually got almost all the solder out. I'm just gonna go ahead once more to get the last points off. And this is why I love working at the electronics lab here at the university. We have all these kinds of equipment here, and this vise makes it so easy to hold the PCB while soldering. These joints are now almost gone, and I will flip the PCB upside down to check on the batteries. And the first battery is gone. Now I'll do the same to the next one. Note that parts of the battery stayed on the PCB on the glue, but that's just the plastic cover. The metal housing is still intact, which is important. Now both batteries are gone, and I must say the glue was very weak and brittle. As soon as I got the pins loose from the solder, I could just wiggle it back and forth, and the glue just breaks when you pull it some more. So removing the batteries is really easy if you have one of these solder suckers. I highly recommend it for desoldering stuff. Load it by pulling down the thumb handle, and then you put the tip onto something and then press the thumb button, and it flips back, sucking up solder in the process. Now I'm gonna do some cleaning to remove the leftover glue and to get all the solder tin off from the solder points. Next, we remove the capacitors one by one. I've already removed the C4 capacitor. Note that this white line is to this side, which means a negative pole. These capacitors are polarity dependent, so don't forget this. So desoldering is easy. You just flip the PCB around and apply some heat while you carefully wiggle the capacitor out, one leg at a time. Then we insert the new capacitor, remember the polarity, and get it flushed down to the PCB. Let's flip it around. We'll add a bit of solder flux to make this easy. And then solder with a leaded solder tin. So that's capacitor C4 replaced. I will now replace C1 and C2. I grab the capacitor and then desolder the legs one at a time. Don't forget the polarity, put in the new capacitor. I really should get one of these microscope cameras for my electronics videos, so you can see what I'm doing much better. Now so far the solders look really good, and it's definitely thanks to this leaded solder tin with flux in it. Just one capacitor left to do, and it's C1. Put it in the trash where it belongs, and get the new capacitor in. I'd say that's very good. I wish I could bring you in closer to the PCB because I'm actually quite proud of these solder joints. But now it's time for the boring stuff. I'll go over all these joints and make sure that they look good, and if necessary add some more leaded solder tin. I think I saw one cracked solder connector somewhere here. And fix it up and make sure there's nothing bugging us later on. Okay, most of the solder joints looked good, some of them did not, and I went over them with some new solder tin. And with that done, I'm going to cut off the legs on the capacitors. So now we'll put in the new batteries. Again, polarity is important, plus is on this side for both batteries. I'm just test fitting for now so I can see it all works with these single tabs. Yes, the guys on the forum were correct as always. You can fit these batteries even though the plus side only has one tab. It's just a few degrees off and it didn't matter. Now we're going to remove them again. Right, we're now going to use simple hot glue to make sure the batteries stay in touch with the PCB. But before you glue, make sure these holes have been cleaned out enough so you can install and remove the battery without having to wait, because the hot glue is going to harden as soon as it gets cold. Nice little bead on there. And push the battery down until the glue hardens. Okay, the first one didn't go perfectly. I didn't get the minus pole all the way down. Let's make it better this time. That's better. All that's left to do now is to flip it around and do the soldering. And that is done. Not the best solders I've made now, but it's okay. So at this point we have basically rebuilt the alarm siren with new batteries and new capacitors. We've also checked the solder joints to make sure they're all good. I'm going to do some cleanup now to get the solder flux away. Then we're going to coat it with some conformal coating. We are almost done, guys, but now it's time for some conformal coating. This spray I'm using is PRF202, where you can go to any electronics store and pick up conformal coating or plastic coating. This will protect the PCB from moisture and make sure no water gets into the electronics. I'm starting with a light coat and then letting it dry. So 10 minutes have passed and it seems to have dried almost completely. Now if we flip it around, you will see there are some connectors here. These ones go to the sirens and we have the jumper. If we were to spray this right now, we would also coat the jumper and the connectors. So what I'm going to do is that I'm going to engage the jumper and also put the horns back on. But that means that potentially if something's wrong, the siren might go off. And I'm in a small space and I have bad hearing from before, so I'm going to actually use earplugs. And I recommend that you do too. And the jumper. Moment of truth. If something is wrong, the horns might go off. Let's hope they don't. Okay, we are live. I'm also using a bit of plastic to cover up the connector to the car. Remember to clean the can after using. You put it upside down and you spray until nothing more comes out. Otherwise the plastic spray will dry in the cap here and you cannot use anything what's left inside it. Each coating takes about 10 to 15 minutes to dry off, and I've gone over both sides 2 times now, and if I feel it, it's a nice non-sticky but plasticky surface, so you can really feel that it's going to repel water. So now we have replaced the batteries, we replaced the capacitors, we made sure the solders look good, and we've coated the PCB with plastic. These 4 methods should make this alarm siren last for a very long time. The only thing I'm worried about is that these batteries are from eBay. They're probably fakes even though they say Sanyo. It's now time to put everything back together, and my old style siren has some kind of rubber coating on the outside and inside of the lip that seals against moisture. I'm not going to put it back for now. Maybe I'm going to use hot glue later on in this indentation here to make sure nothing gets in or out. But if you have the newer style, the glued siren, well, you're in for some work now, and when you glue it together you can't really take it apart again. Now a trick I have that I know works on the 9.5, I'm not sure on the 9.3, is that you pull the cable from the alarm siren out to the engine bay. That's quite easily done, and then you can sort of test fit the siren for a few days while driving it. So you don't have to lift up the car and open up the wheel well every time you're gonna reach the siren. So for the moment I'm not gonna glue the siren, but I will do it later on as I'm finished. Now when we put the siren together, there is this green cap on the back side. Remove it and put it to the side for now, and I'll show you why in just a second. We'll put the 2 halves together. And there's this little piece of plastic that seals on the connector. Push it down again with a tool of your choice. The reason why we pull this green plug is that when everything is sealed up, there's nowhere for the air to go. So now that we put it together, you can push back the green thing. So this is the Alarm Siren rebuilt. But if you don't want to do it yourself, I know there are places around the web that can do this for a small fee. I don't have any specific experiences or recommendations regarding these rebuilding companies, but if you have, please let us know down in the comments. This would probably help someone. Now in Laxen, my old car, the 2002 95 Aero, I have to give a special thanks to David up in Kungsör, who did the rebuild for me for free. His intention was to make an in-depth guide of how this works. I still have to see it, David. But anyway, in the meantime, here is my video guide, and hopefully it will show you how to get this done. Now I have to say this job wasn't very difficult. As long as you get the siren apart, it's quite simple soldering. The only tricky thing is really to source the right type of batteries. Now I'm afraid you'll have to wait until part 3 to see me installing this siren in my own car. Because there's something I haven't told you about Phoenix yet. Even though it's a very well equipped car, it doesn't come with the alarm system. But I've sourced all the parts necessary, and with this new rebuilt siren I can now make an alarm retrofit video for you. So in the next video in this series about the Saab alarm systems, I will show you how to make an alarm system retrofit. Complete guide with all the components necessary. So thank you very much for watching this probably very long Trionic 7 video. And please let me know what you think, because I have made a few videos now about the Saab 95 electronics, and I want to know if you enjoy them or not. So do use the comment box below and let me know what you think. Also use the comment box below if you have any questions or comments regarding this Alarm Siren DIY. As always, we are on social media, and don't forget to subscribe to us here on YouTube. I'm out, and I'll see you in the next Saab video. Bye bye.